I'm now recording. Oh yeah. So one of the things that happened on Friday is I got off of the Zoom meeting, and whenever you end a Zoom meeting, it takes the recording that it was making and it converts it to an MP4 file at Zoom. And when I got off the meeting last time, it started that process, continued that process for about 3 seconds, and then the whole thing crashed. And normally you can go back and recover unsaved or unconverted videos, but when I logged back into Zoom, that video had not been saved. So last Friday is lost to the electronic ether. If you guys want, I can go back through and make a screencast of that information, but that's up to you guys. If you would find that useful, I can perfectly well do that. If not, I won't.
I would personally appreciate it just because I was so late from my exam.
Yeah, okay. All right, then I'll try and do that in the next 24 hours or so and get that up.
Thank you.
It won't have people's questions and answers and stuff like that on it, but at least it'll be me going through the information.
Well, not trying to bug you, but have you gotten anywhere on our exams yet?
No, I haven't, but that's on the top of my list. I had another grant proposal review that I was working on over the weekend, and now that that's taken care of, I'm back to grading.
Do we have another assignment out with you right now, or is that the only one that's out?
You have a
lit
summary.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
A lit summary and an exam.
All right, sounds good.
All right?
Yep.
All right, here goes screen share. Today we are starting sexual selection. So everybody see the screencast? The screen share?
Yep.
Okay, so all of you should know what this is a picture of. What is it a picture of?
A sperm and an egg.
It's a sperm and an egg. This is one of my favorite images because this encapsulates like everything you need to know about the theoretical basis for sexual selection and sexual conflict. In the egg, what do you have? How does your book describe the difference between males and females at this very beginning stage?
The egg is large and mobile and food rich.
Oh, you're reading off the next slide, aren't you?
No, I took notes when I was reading.
Okay, so it's large, it's immobile, and it is energy and nutrient rich. What are the characteristics of the sperm?
Super small.
Super small. What else is it?
It can move.
It's mobile. What does it have in terms of energy and nutrients?
Not much.
Not much. It's just a packet of DNA. A packet of DNA with a tail. So in this situation, you have this, at the very beginning of reproduction, you have this huge disparity in the investment in reproduction represented by males and females. Males invest in gajillions of small expendable gametes. Females invest in huge gametes that represent a pretty huge investment in nutrients and energy from the very beginning. And this difference in initial investment plays out throughout the rest of the life of males and females. So we have this quote from Darwin: the sexual struggle is of two kinds. In one, and now your images are clouding my view of my own screen. In one, it is between the individuals of the same sex, generally the males, in order to drive away or kill their rivals, the females remaining passive. Whilst in the other, the struggle is likewise between the individuals of the same sex in order to excite or charm those of the opposite sex, generally the females, which no longer remain passive but select the more agreeable partners. So this is in his own, 19th century way of writing, Darwin is in this passage describing two forms of sexual selection. One form of sexual selection is sexual selection among males who would be competing for access to females or access to fertilization opportunities. And then there are females who basically exercise choice among the males, and you can think of them as competing for, in a sense, the best males that are out there, and they will reject males that they view to be inferior for whatever reason. And so we have these two ways of thinking about sexual selection from the male and the female perspective, being male-male competition and female choice. And these are the two dominant ways, dominant lenses through which to think about sexual selection.
The other names that were in the book, do you care about those?
Like which names are you thinking of?
One of them was like inter and one was intra. Do you want us to know?
You can refer to them that way. So obviously, intrasexual selection is male-male competition. Intersexual selection is when females are choosing males.
Okay.
But I think the more common thing you hear in the literature and read in the literature is male-male competition and female choice.
Okay.
And that's the dominant language that I will use. So this situation that you see in the picture is essentially anisogamy gametes. Anisogamy is the antithesis of isogamy. These are different sized gametes. And these are similarly sized. So that's the meaning of these two terms. And what you see in this image is a situation where the gametes are very, very different sizes. So female gametes typically are large, immobile, nutrient-rich, and male gametes are tiny, mobile, consisting of little more than a piece of self-propelled DNA. So it's basically a packet of DNA attached to a collar that goes around the base of the head of the sperm that has a bunch of mitochondria in it, and then a flagellum that is powered by all those mitochondria that propels it towards the female. And like I said, your book and most people who study sexual selection view this as the fundamental difference between males and females. And as a matter of fact, even when you think about plants, which you normally don't have to think about in terms of male and female in the way that we might think of animals, in plants, the male flower is the flower that produces the larger of the two gametes. Sorry, the female flower is the flower that produces the larger of the two gametes. The male flower is the flower that produces the smaller of the two gametes. And so it may seem weird to talk about male and female flowers in plants, but we do, and it's all based on gamete size. So in your book chapter, they talk about Parker's ideas about why, and I have the date wrong, it should be Parker's 1972, about why you should have the evolution of these different sized gametes when more than likely the original ancestral state for gametes is gametes of the same size. Why would anisogamy have evolved?
Talked about how like larger zygotes do better, and so like maybe the female invests more into a few large eggs so that they have a better chance of survival, and then the male. There was some example about like why there couldn't be large sperm and large eggs because that makes the male less competitive against other males or something.
Yeah, so if large gametes help the zygote, if coming from a large gamete helps a zygote survive, that then is selection that would act to increase gamete size in females. And as soon as you go down that path, then males gametes would be competing for access to those larger gametes. And one of the ways to compete effectively would be to create more gametes. But in the process of creating more gametes, what do you have to do?
Make them smaller.
You have to make them smaller. And so this then sets in motion a set of selective factors that would lead ultimately to gametes of different sizes. What do you guys think of that idea?
My question is, couldn't it have evolved the opposite way? Like, why couldn't eggs be small and sperm be big?
So that's that's a tricky thing, because what do we always call the egg? We always call the egg the big gamete. Whatever the big gamete is, that's the egg. And that egg is always produced by a female. Well, why is it female? Well, because it's the one that's producing the big gamete. So the question isn't what is egg and sperm. The question is, why did we evolve different sized gametes as opposed to just evolving gametes that are all the same size? So don't get caught up in the language. Let's just talk about isogamy versus anisogamy. So does their evolutionary scenario make sense to you, or does it seem like you're having trouble wrapping your head around why that might be the case?
Makes sense to me.
What about the rest of you?
It's kind of a random question. I'm
Yeah.
not really blind to this, but I mean, it kind of does. Is it so all males that have sperm, they don't have like 100% sperm count, right?
I mean,
like they're not 100% fertile.
Well, I guess no, but I don't understand where the question's coming from.
Well, I don't know. I was just reading this thing yesterday about the mutant bull thing, and then I thought that some bulls aren't fully fertile. Like some of them are 65% fertile, some of them are 70. And I didn't know if that played a role on how much sperm they produce or not. I don't know.
Yeah, so go back to in your chapter, and I'm looking at your book chapter on my iPad, so I'm not sure what exactly the page is that I'm looking at. It says, now once larger gametes evolve, there is immediately selection on smaller gametes to seek out larger gametes to fuse with in order to parasitize their food reserves. At the same time, larger gametes will be selected to resist the small ones, since the most viable zygote of all will be one resulting from the fusion of two large gametes. However, fusion between large and small, or small and large gametes will predominate simply because small gametes are produced in larger numbers. Therefore, the penalty for a large gamete failing to resist a small gamete will not be so severe as that paid by a small gamete if it fails to find a large partner. So when you think about males and things like sperm count, and this is true for humans who are having trouble reproducing. Since Luke is thinking about bulls, there are a number of factors that can affect sperm viability. One of the things that can happen with sperm is that they just lack the ability to be mobile. Something is wrong with their structure such that they either don't develop a flagellum or develop a weakened flagellum, or they lack mitochondria that can power that flagellum. And so making the trip to where the egg is impossible for them. And so oftentimes males will be infertile, not because there's anything wrong with the sperm themselves genetically. It's just that they don't have good motility. So if you're having trouble reproducing, one of the first things that they will do is they will examine your sperm and see if they're actually suitable. The other thing is, have any of you taken developmental biology with Dr. Vora?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of you have. When we think of an egg, and when you see that egg on the previous example, what is that egg? What is that ovum lacking? That is found at least in many animals, certainly mammals.
Doesn't look like it's got the envelope anymore. The vitelline envelope.
Yeah, so normally the egg is surrounded by layers and layers of cells. Multi-layers thick, typically. Do you guys remember what these cells are called? These layers are called?
Starts with a G, I think.
Isn't it granulosa cells?
Yep. And in order for a tiny sperm to fertilize that egg, what does it have to do?
Get through the wall.
It makes a little head and lets out some enzymes that digest it.
Yeah, you need millions of sperm attacking that egg, because in the process of attacking that egg, most of those sperm are going to sacrifice themselves. At the head of a sperm, you have, I'm going to now draw the sperm really big. You basically have a sperm which is essentially filled with DNA, and then on the outside of this sperm there is a cap, and this cap is filled with enzymes. At the base of this sperm is a collar. That collar is filled with mitochondria that are in lines up and down the base of the flagellum. The flagellum comes out, and that's what powers the sperm towards the egg. And in this sperm cap are enzymes that then, when they come into contact with the cells surrounding the egg, they basically lyse those cells. So they're catalytic enzymes. They lyse these cells until finally they have created an area that is clear for the sperm to finally make contact with the cell membrane of the egg. That may take millions of sperm to finally break down those defenses. And then once the egg is exposed to the onslaught of remaining sperm, not all the sperm are going to be able to fuse with that cell membrane, because they will have not the right receptors on the outside of their membranes, et cetera, et cetera. And so it really is something of a crapshoot getting fertilization accomplished. Once fertilization occurs, the membrane changes, and generally you're not allowed to have more sperm fuse with it. So there is a protection once fertilization has occurred. And so going back to Luke's question about fertility, it could be that the sperm can't get to the egg. It could be that once they get to the egg, you don't have enough of them to actually get through this layer of cells that surrounds the eggs. Or once you've gotten rid of all of those cells that surround the egg, there's something wrong that makes it impossible for the sperm to fuse with the egg and for fertilization to occur. So there's lots of reasons why you might have infertility in something like a human or a bull or a frog or an insect. But when you think about fertility and whether, what percentage of a bull's sperm are actually fertile, what that's probably being based upon is some reproductive biologist who works on bull reproduction, basically assessing those bull sperm for things like motility and things like that. Not getting at these other things, which you can't really test very well in a lab, which is, so you can look at sperm number and sperm motility, but you can't look at a lot of other things that might be affecting fertility. So sperm do get messed up plenty of times. But the nice thing about it is males produce so many sperm that it doesn't even matter if even a fairly large fraction of them are not functional, because males generally produce way more than is necessary. Does that answer your question, Luke?
Yeah, flying colors.
Okay. All right, so what are some of the implications of this difference in gamete size? So one of the implications is that reproductive success of males and females is very different. Once a female has mated with a male, she has probably maxed out her reproductive output, because the male has the capacity, because he produces tons of sperm, has the capacity to fertilize however many eggs she has produced. And so in this figure from Bateman, you see that female reproductive output doesn't really change after the first mate, whereas male reproductive output continues. The more number of mates that that male can acquire, the higher his fitness is going to be. This leads to differences in, for example, parental care. When you look at most parental care situations out in the world, out in nature, where organisms provide parental care, that parental care is almost always accomplished by the female. And it's because of a couple of factors. One is the female invested more in initial investment. But then the other reason is that there's very little incentive for males to stick around and care for offspring, because their reproductive success is determined by the number of mates that they can acquire, whereas the females is involved in taking whatever reproductive success you've gotten from the first male and making sure that that reproductive success actually makes it. And so there are different incentives for the two sexes in this case. So where one sex invests considerably more than the other, members of the latter will compete among themselves to mate with members of the former. And so once again, these initial investment decisions have downstream effects on things like parental care.
Couldn't you say the males are also determined by the number of offspring that make it? Because if they mate with a bunch of different females that lead to non-successful offspring, then their reproductive success is just as low.
So this is for Drosophila, and so Drosophila actually don't have parental care. But for example, in humans, let's just take humans or any other mammal for that matter, when a male impregnates a female, that female is going to carry around that offspring during gestation for a period of time. After that, that animal is going to be born, and then that animal is going to be provisioned for a time period by exclusively the female. That's the very act of being a mammal, is the presence of mammary glands. And so the success of that offspring is dependent upon the female sticking around and providing parental care. It's not really dependent on the male sticking around and providing parental care at all. And so the male is much better off from a fitness standpoint of just copulating with as many females as he possibly can. And then whatever success each female has, that is just success that adds up to him over time. Now, there are cases where parental care by both parents is required in order to successfully, for example, fledge birds. And so what you oftentimes see in birds is a greater proportion of bird species exhibit biparental care, because for one thing, the nature of provisioning of offspring isn't biologically tied to one of the two sexes. And oftentimes, because of their high metabolic rate, it requires a lot of provisioning, and that provisioning can be much better accomplished by both parents remaining at the nest than a single one. And in those cases, what you see is a lot of biparental care. So it doesn't have to always be monoparental care. It can be biparental care. But there's always, even in biparental care situations, there's always an incentive for a male to increase the number of mates that it has. And there's very little incentive for females to do that, because having another mate doesn't improve their fitness at all.
Mm. Okay.
Because they're ultimately limited by the number of eggs that they can produce, because they produce fewer, larger eggs as opposed to males that produce tons of tiny sperm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the book talked about how some males will kind of be more successful than other males, like I think it was like walruses or some kind of something like that. What about
You mean
males?
like this?
Oh yes, elephant seals. So, so if males are less competitive, does that mean they're more likely to stick around and care for the offspring that they have?
No, males are pigs anyway. No. So once again, this comes about. So in the case of elephant seals, this comes about because elephant seals generally occur in what is called a lek. Leks are interesting social structures. They occur in elephant seals. Here in the Midwest, they occur in prairie chickens. And what happens when prairie chickens or elephant seals get to the place where they breed, the males all congregate in a space. And they will set up territories, and this is true for prairie chickens. In prairie chickens, it's called a booming ground. And what happens is male prairie chickens arrive there and they start making these eerie hooting noises. And there's a big enough aggregation there that it begins to attract the attention of females. And females will come and they will basically check out the males. And the males go through a whole stereotypical mating display that they exhibit. And there's one territory, typically towards the middle of the territory, but it doesn't have to be in the exact middle of the territory. There is one territory that is the best territory. But in this territory, there's seemingly no resources that are useful to anybody. And the prairie chicken females, when they come, they will watch the males compete for access to this space. And back in the old days, what biologists would do is they would sit in a stand, they would break out their rifle, they would shoot that prairie chicken dead. And after that prairie chicken was dead, there would be a competition for which male takes over that portion of the lek. And that male would be the male that gets the most matings, in the same way that the dead male before him was the one that got the most matings. You could shoot that male out of the lek, and there would be a fight for control over that territory, and the male that occupies that space becomes the male that gets all the matings. And in this case, depending on the system, a similar situation happens with elephant seals on beaches. And in elephant seals, the top male can get as many as 95% of all of the matings, which means that the remainder of the matings are spread among the rest of the elephant seals. But the second ranked, so this would be the first ranked male. The second ranked male might get 2% of the remaining. The third ranked male might get 1% of the remaining, and everybody else gets nothing. And so in some mating systems, there are competitive scenarios that get set up such that reproductive success among males is really concentrated in a relatively few number of individuals. This is certainly the case with lek mating systems. And the same thing, it's not quite as extreme as this when prairie chickens do this, but it's very much skewed towards a few individuals that are considered to be the dominant males in the lek that get the majority of the matings, and there are some individuals in leks that never get any matings. And so you end up,
Why does the middle circle have no resources, but it's still the best?
That is actually a mystery that biologists have been trying to figure out for decades. One of the characteristics of leks is the idea that the lek has no inherent resource beyond the genetic resources provided by the male. And so it may be that what the females are assessing actually is just the ability to hold on to a territory in the lek. And if you then mate with that male who has the ability to hold on to that central territory in the lek, you will produce sons that have that capacity to hold on to the central territory in the lek. And so your sons will be more successful because you mated with a successful male. And so this may be one of those situations, and your book talks about this later in the chapter, where the only thing that the male has to offer the female is actually good quality genes, strangely enough. Other questions about Lex? We'll talk about Lex more in detail later. So here you have this table where you have, the elephant seals, where the maximum number of offspring produced during your lifetime is 100 for the male and only 8 for the female. And that's because in the case of elephant seals, the elephant seal is in that central territory. All of the females go and mate with that individual. And so during any given breeding season, that male gets to mate with a lot of females, whereas each female only mates with that particular male. Similar situation in red deer. In humans, this is from the Guinness Book of World Records. I don't know how trustworthy the Guinness Book of World Records is, but this guy from the bloodthirsty Moulay Ismail, the bloodthirsty emperor of Morocco, who supposedly sired 888 children, as opposed to the most productive female ever, which was 69 children in 27 pregnancies. I can't even imagine what that woman's life must have been like. That's a lot. That's even a lot by Duggar standards. And then you have situations in kittiwakes, and these are rarer, where you have similar levels of reproductive output in the kittiwake gull. And this is probably because these gulls probably nest on flat, barren ground, where the baby gulls are both needing a lot of provision, but also needing the attention of two parents to care for the offspring in terms of protecting them from predation attempts. And as a result, this is probably a situation with biparental care, such that the male has to stick around in order to ensure the survival of those offspring. As a result, he can't go off and have what we call extra pair copulations. Extra pair copulations or extra pair matings. This is where you're mated to one individual and then you sneak off and mate with another individual outside of your typical mating pair. And because they don't have those opportunities, because they're stuck caring for the offspring that they have currently sired, they don't have this skew in the number of offspring produced. Did that address your question, Alexis?
Yes.
Okay. So parental investment, when we think about Trivers' ideas, females invest more in each offspring. They then choose males that offer the best resources or the best genes. We talked about, in the competition chapter, we talked about why you might want to maintain a territory. You maintain a territory because that territory has resources in it. In many cases, those resources are food, which is what we talked about to a certain degree in the competition chapter. But females may choose males for either resources like food and shelter and things like that, or they may choose males simply because of what they deem to be good quality characteristics that are indicative of good genes. Males tend to invest more in courtship and mating behavior directed towards competing for and exploiting female investment. So the females have invested all of this energy in reproduction. Males then compete for access to that female investment. So why do the sexes differ in investment after the gametes are formed? This is another question that you might ask of this whole situation. One of the reasons that males may stick around and provide parental care is they may be uncertain of the paternity of the offspring. And so you might stick around after you have copulated with a female in order to assure your paternity. But if there's no way of assuring that that female was a virgin from the beginning, you don't know how many of the offspring that are going to come out of that particular copulatory event are actually yours, and so there's less incentive to stick around and provide care for those offspring. So uncertainty of paternity is something that oftentimes confuses students, because if you can reliably know that the female that you're mating with is a virgin, you have a high degree of paternity, and so you may stick around simply to preserve that, and that sticking around may actually lead to parental care. If, on the other hand, there is uncertainty of paternity, and this would happen with any species for which there is internal fertilization, if you don't know that those are your children, there is a less incentive to stick around and provide parental care for them. In some cases, females try to exploit this by essentially, how's the best way to put this? In some cases, females can exploit uncertainty of paternity by essentially, and you see birds doing this, attempting to attract other males to themselves in order to essentially tell the male, if you don't stay here and guard me from other extra pair copulations, I'm going to extra pair copulate with those individuals in the territory next door. And as a result, you need to stay here, mind this territory so that you know that you have certainty of paternity, so that you know that those offspring are actually yours as opposed to somebody else's. That can be exploited by females to get the males to stick around for a longer period of time and provide parental care. And this is evidently how biparental care has evolved in some species. So you don't want to be investing in someone else's offspring, generally speaking. So competition for access to female investment leads to skewed reproductive success among males within a species. As we talked about in the elephant seal, this competition leads to one dominant male getting most of the matings, and the other ones are not. And because male reproductive success depends on the number of matings, which reduces the incentive for parental care, you will oftentimes see parental care being accomplished mainly by females. So you can think about parental care, no parental care, monoparental care, biparental care. These are all the different categories, and communal care. Of all of these, no parental care, if you look at it on a species by species basis, no parental care is the norm. Monoparental care is next most common. But with a small proportion of exceptions, this is almost always accomplished by the female. Biparental care is next most common. Obviously, this is accomplished by both the males and the females. And then communal care is where a variety of individuals, both the parents of the offspring and individuals who are not the parents of the offspring, will care for offspring. This is the rarest form, and this is involved when the amount of parental care that is required for the successful production of offspring is really high. And this is really, really rare. I can think of two examples at the moment of this in all of the animals that I know about their reproductive and parental care systems. Most insect species don't exert any effort in parental care at all, which is why the vast majority of species don't, because the vast majority of species on planet Earth are insects, and most insects do not engage in parental care. Monoparental care, once again, is more common and more common with the females than biparental care, just because of this investment issue. Questions? All right, so this leads you to think about, or might lead you to think about sex ratios. So in humans, about 51% of humans are female and 49% of males are, of humans are males. So that's pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio. And evolutionary theory would generally say that selection would generally lead to matched sex ratios. Why would evolution push organisms towards even sex ratios of males and females? Think about the evolution of sex ratios. You guys know what has happened in China over the last couple of decades, right?
They've limited the number of kids you can have or something like that.
Yep. Back in the 1990s, they instituted the one-child policy. So in order to combat population growth that was really too high and unsustainable, they limited parents to having only one offspring. They did this mainly by taxing individuals who had 2 or more offspring heavily. So there was a financial incentive to limit reproduction to one child. Because of cultural norms in China and the way land and things like that are inherited, males end up being more valuable than females. And so what has happened over the course of time that the one-child policy has occurred is over time there has been a skewed sex ratio where there are many more males than there are females. What's the consequence of that? So let's say you were born in the 1990s and now you're coming of age and you're a dude and you're one of many dudes and you're trying to find a wife.
There are fewer available wives.
There are fewer available wives, which means you have to be
Solo.
Attractive.
Harder. You have to have a
smarter,
better
more.
personality.
What's that, Alexis?
I said you have to have a better personality.
You might have to have a better personality. You might have to be better looking. You might have to be more wealthy, or you might have to be all of those things all at the same time. Why?
It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. There's more males than females, and
it's more
And
of a
the-
female choice.
And the sex that is in the least supply
gets to be choosy.
is going to be the more valuable of the two. They can be choosy because they are essentially in the driver's seat. China has relaxed its one-child policy because they're recognizing that this is causing problems in that there is this hugely skewed sex ratio in China now. So as one of the sexes becomes rare, that sex becomes more valuable. So if you are in China and you had a daughter rather than a son, then now as a parent, you're looking at your daughter and your daughter has the choice of essentially whatever male she wants. That puts her in a very good position. Same thing in nature. If females are less abundant than males, there's going to be harder competition among males to attract those females, and females are going to be able to choose the best quality males. That puts these females in a very valuable position. If you are going to then take advantage, if you're going to reproduce in an environment where there is a skewed sex ratio, you would get more bang for your buck by producing female offspring than male offspring, because if females are rare, not every male is going to find a mate. And so as sex ratio becomes skewed, natural selection should push that sex ratio back towards a 1-to-1, because if you produce more males, many of those males are going to experience a fitness of 0, whereas all of the females will experience a fitness greater than 0. And as a result, evolutionarily, natural selection should favor those individuals who naturally produce more females than males, in which case this sex ratio will become equalized over time. And so what we see in humans is we see 51% to 49% in the United States, at least. That's not statistically distinguishable from a 1-to-1 ratio. So the operational sex ratio, though, is not the actual sex ratio. The operational sex ratio is the sex ratio of actually who gets mated. And so in the case of elephant seals, while there may be 50 females on a beach and 50 males on a beach, the operational sex ratio is much different because what's happening there?
All the females are mating, but only a few of the males.
Yeah, and so the operational sex ratio is very skewed because of the mating system that has been set up, such that you may have 50 males on the beach, but there's only 3 of them mating with all 50 of those females. And so measuring the sex ratio that you observe doesn't necessarily tell you anything about whether or not sexual selection is acting in a population. And so a better way of measuring sexual selection is by looking at what's the variance in mating success. Is that variance higher than we would expect if individuals were mating at random? And then you can also quantify the strength of selection on specific traits. So if females are being choosy about which males that they mate with, then you should expect certain traits or certain varieties of a particular trait to be more valuable in terms of intersexual selection, female choice. In addition, if the outcome of mating opportunities is determined by male-male competition, there may be traits that are particularly useful, or varieties of traits that are particularly useful in male-male competitive interactions. So we talked about the beetles, the horned beetles in the last chapter. And there are some beetles that have these really elaborate horns that they use in male-male competition, but then there are smaller males that don't have elaborate horns that accomplish mating by basically sneaking by the big horned males and copulating with females without going through those competitive contests. And so particular traits may determine the outcome of male-male competition. Those would then be subject to selection in the same way that female choice can exert selection on male phenotype. Somebody was about to say something?
I was going to say, what exactly do you mean when you say quantify the strength of selection? Like, what is that?
Well, you can actually measure it. So let me go to the board again. So let's say that you guys have seen elephant seals, right? You guys seen videos of elephant seals?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you notice about elephant seals?
They're ugly.
They are ugly. So the next slide is about elephant seals. So this is a good tie-in here. There's a link at the bottom. Right-click on that and get it to open the link on your own computer, and watch that video for a few minutes. Just do this at your home because you won't be able to hear the commentary and stuff from me doing it on my computer. Watch that for a few minutes and I'll be back.
Did you guys get to work?
It says 404 page not found.
Me too.
Didn't work for me either.
Well, so much for that one.
I got it to work by going to the PowerPoint and then clicking on it.
I just Googled it and found it.
Video done yet?
It didn't work for a lot of us, so we're having to go
Oh, yeah.
to a separate thing.
Hyperlinked. Open a hyperlink. I'll share my screen with you. Okay, there is a, can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see the screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, those are elephant seals. They are called elephant seals because they have that trunk-like proboscis. That is a male bellowing at the top of his lungs, and they're gigantic. You see that male is right next to a female. Look at the difference in size between the male and the female. Sexual dimorphism is something that often occurs when you have a lot of male-male competition, because the males have to be bigger in order to compete. These guys fight with one another basically by slamming their bodies against one another and biting one another. This is what a beach looks like. You see this male is chasing off other males from around his territory. And that's a big fat male. And there's another big fat male, and they're about to face off in this competition. And you can see that that one there already has a bunch of scars on it from earlier contests. And over the course of time, you will see that they get bloodier and bloodier and bloodier. You can see the one is very bloody around his throat. And they just go at it like gangbusters. And now it's really bloody. So intense competition for males. No, for access to females, rather. Presumably, whichever male prevails in this contest is the one with the better capability of attracting females, because he's going to get all of the matings, and the one that is defeated is going to get none of them. And so a female mating with that male is going to produce sons that are of higher quality than if she mated with a male that was unable to defend the territory. And it's quite brutal, as it turns out. So when we think about the operational sex ratio, we can think about, you can still see me, right, on the board?
Yeah.
Yep.
you can think about the distribution of male, this is male elephant seal size, from small, which would still be a quite large elephant seal, to large. If size is the major determinant of who gets to control the lek, and as a result, who gets 95% of the matings, while this is the mean of the population, the distribution of sizes of those males that actually get to breed might be quite small. And so whatever the mean of the actual breeding population is, subtracting the actual mean of the population of males as a whole, this difference between the pre-selection mean and the post-selection mean, when in this case sexual selection is the mode of selection, that difference is the strength of selection. And so you should be able to look at mating success and be able to quantify what the degree of selection is, the strength and direction of selection is, simply by looking at which males are those that are actually able to reproduce. And as it turns out, as you can see in the next slide here, oh, except that you can't see that because I'm not sharing that.
What is the y-axis on the graph you drew on the board?
Oh, this is just frequency of size.
Okay.
The frequency of individuals of size X. So while the population may have quite a lot of variation in size, and the average size may be average, an average size, it's only those individuals that are the largest individuals that actually get the opportunity to mate. And so in elephant seals, females are a defendable resource. You can defend females against other males. Males compete for access to those females. The top 5 males achieved 48 to 92% of all matings in the study by LaBeouf and his colleagues. Males are typically 3 to 7.5 times heavier than females. Males delay first mating attempts by the females, and as a result, males delay first mating attempts, and they don't try and mate when they are younger and smaller. They wait until they've gained enough size. And the bigger you are, the more successful you are at fending off competitors for females. And so there is selection on body size for males, which is why you have this huge sexual dimorphism in body size in elephant seals. We also have body size sexual dimorphism in humans. Males are on average larger than females, and it's probably because body size has been driven by sexual selection in humans to a certain degree. If you don't believe this, think about who we elect president. If you think about Obama, what's that?
The taller candidate.
The taller candidate is almost always the candidate that wins. So when you think about Trump is a tall man and also a large man. Obama was taller than average. Bill Clinton is taller than average. The first George Bush is taller than average. Ronald Reagan is above average in height. The presidents that were average height or shorter than average were guys like George Bush II and Jimmy Carter. And so we tend to elect leaders, strangely enough, on the basis of height rather than qualifications or capacities to make wise decisions. And so we have this innate bias towards larger individuals in humans, which probably at least partly accounts for sexual size dimorphism in humans. It's a shame that we can't make better decisions and that we're kind of hardwired to make certain kinds of decisions in certain ways. All right, we're out of time, so we'll stop there and we'll pick up here on Wednesday. Any questions? All right, I'll see you guys in about, I don't know, an hour and a half at 3 o'clock. Yeah. All right.
See you then.
See ya.